You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today we're diving into a topic that touches every university with an agricultural research program, a plant science department, or a horticultural breeding effort. How to protect plant innovations coming out of academic laboratories. If you work in a tech transfer office, you know that plants don't fit neatly into the usual playbook. There are plant patents, utility patents, plant variety protection certificates, and international considerations, each with its own rules, limitations, and strategic trade-offs. Add gene editing technologies like CRISPR into the mix, and you have a landscape that is evolving faster than many offices can keep up with. My guest today is someone who has spent her entire career at the intersection of intellectual property and plant innovation. Heidi Nebel is a member and chairperson of the Biotechnology/chemical practice at McKee, Voorhees Sease, PLC in Des Moines, Iowa. Heidi is an intellectual property attorney with over 30 years of experience obtaining patents and designing IP strategy in biotechnology, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals with a particular depth of expertise in plant-related IP. Her career has been shaped by some of the most consequential moments in plant IP law. Heidi was involved in the landmark U.S. Supreme Court case J.E.M. Ag Supply, Inc. versus Pioneer Hi-Bred International, Inc., which confirmed the availability of utility patent protection for plant varieties. She led the McKee Voorhees team in a strategic alliance with Pioneer Hi-Bred International and DuPont, where the firm served as exclusive outside patent counsel across all technology areas, with a primary focus on germplasm patents, transgenic protocols, genetically modified plants, and male sterility. Heidi's clients include more than 30 universities and research institutions, as well as Fortune 500 companies around the world. She has been appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture to serve on the USDA Plant Variety Protection Advisory Board, where she helps to shape the country's IP policy for plants. She has also served as vice chair of the USPTO Patent Public Advisory Committee and is a member of CIOPORA, the international community of breeders of asexually reproduced horticultural plants. Heidi is actively involved in Autumn, where she has served on the board of the Midwest region for 4 years and has presented at Autumn meetings for more than 15 years. Heidi was the 2022 recipient of the Iowa Biotechnology Association Biotech Leader Award, holds the AV Preeminent rating from LexisNexis, Martindale-Hubbell, and has been recognized for multiple consecutive years by IAM Patent 1000 for her top-tier patent expertise. Heidi, welcome to Autumn on the Air. Really thrilled to have you here on the podcast today.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about plants. It has absolutely been a passion of mine for about 30 plus years practice.
Yeah, and we have a lot to talk about with respect to plants today. So, we could probably go on for hours given the two of us. But I thought maybe the best place to kick things off is to just start with the basics. And maybe the best way to approach this is from the perspective of a tech transfer professional who might be handling their very first plant-related invention disclosure. Can you walk us through the main forms of IP protection available for plants here in the U.S.? We have plant patents, we have utility patents, we have plant variety protection certificates. Explain the difference between all of those.
Yeah, so that could take an hour just there. But in general, great that you recognize that there are 4. The U.S. has more plant protection regimes than anywhere else in the world because we also have the unique aspect called plant patents. So we have your first of all, your garden variety utility patent, and that is like a patent for a widget, anything else. And that is available for plant varieties that are the result of traditional breeding. That was the J.E.M case that I was privileged to be able to participate in that went all the way to our Supreme Court. We have utility patents. We have plant patents, which is a separate statute run by the USPTO and is separate and apart from the utility patent statute. The plant patent statute was passed in the 1930s, and at that point, it was not thought that you could get a utility patent on a plant variety. So they passed a separate statute. They loosened the 112 requirements a little bit. So you just have to present a picture and you have one claim. And that is so a different kind of protection that's available, a little bit more limited than a utility patent. Apart from all of those at the patent office, we have what's called plant breeders' rights or plant variety protection certificates, as they're called here in the United States. The PVP is a U.S. enactment of plant breeders' rights, and that is maintained and run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. Differences in protection, I'm going to say all day, every day, and twice on Sunday, get a utility patent. A utility patent is the coverage is defined by your IP attorney, and as creative as your IP attorney could be in drafting claims, after prosecuting through the patent office. So we can get much broader coverage with a utility patent. PVPs and plant patents are a little bit more narrow in coverage, limited to maybe a single plant or something that is essentially derived therefrom.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the utility patent. And, theoretically, you could, if you had an asexually reproduced plant, right, you could get a utility patent, a plant patent, and a PVP. So I always get asked sometimes about, when is a good time to pursue maybe more than just that utility patent and maybe a plant patent or a PVP?
And that's a great point that I neglected to mention. The plant patent statute is limited to plants that are asexually developed. I always, you think about somebody that gives you cuttings of a plant that you reproduce. So it's the same plant over and over and over. So you could see how maybe that would be something that would be easier to get your head around getting patents coverage too. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten the question. I wanted to get that point out about, could you get when should you think about the other forms?
More than one, maybe more than just the utility.
So I think you think about that. Typically, a PVP is going to be granted more quickly than a utility patent. So you think about things like lifespan of and usefulness of the variety. For example, if it's an asexually produced plant like a peach tree or something, that might last, and be a valuable peach tree or an apple tree for 20, 30 years, red delicious. We still think about that. That's still a very important plant. So it depends on the lifetime. It depends on the cost-benefit ratio. Is it a specialty plant? Is it something like wheat that's going to be mass-produced or corn? Or is it something that's more of a unique specialty crop and the market isn't quite as big? For example, you think about UC Davis and what they've done with their clementines. I think that is a multi-million-dollar market. You want to protect that every way possible. Even we also talk about things like contracts and trademarks and all kinds of other forms of protection as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about the J.E.M. Ag Supply case, and that case went to the Supreme Court, as you noted. And that was more than 2 decades ago, but it's still a very foundational case. For some of our listeners who may not be familiar with that case, can you explain a little bit what was at stake in it and how that decision shaped the way that universities protect their plant innovations even today?
Yeah, so that was a case that involved somebody that was rebagging and reselling Pioneer seed. And on the bag, we have a bag tag that says that this material is patented. So we Pioneer sued the reseller, and we asserted patent infringement because you can't make or use something that is covered by a patent. That's an exclusive right of the patent owner. We sued, and they counter-claimed that our patents were invalid because plants are not eligible subject matter for utility patents. We got summary judgment. They appealed to the Federal Circuit, the summary judgment got affirmed, and they appealed to the Supreme Court. And we were shocked. We were shocked when the Supreme Court granted cert, because ever since 1985, the Patent Office had been granting utility patents for plant varieties. That case was called Ex parte Hibbard, and that was a Board of Appeals case. So this had been going on for close to 25 years. Why would the Supreme Court grant cert? So we were pretty nervous. My very important role in 1999, when we were briefing the case, was to count how many utility patents had been granted and would be invalidated if the Supreme Court were to, that's my very important legal contribution, were to say that these are no longer patent eligible. So we went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was an incredible experience, and to watch, the argument commence. And I remember RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, asked the first question, and I knew in my head that I think that it was going to turn out okay. And we were going to win, because she asked, isn't it true, Mr. Sease, that in order to get a utility patent, you have to do more than you do for a PVP? And that's true. The requirements for a utility patent are non-obviousness, and also you have to make a public deposit. Neither of those things are required for a PVP. So the Supreme Court decided, yes, those two forms of statutory regimes of protection can coexist. Congress did not intend, by passing the PVP law, that it was the exclusive form of protection for plants. So it was a wonderful experience. And what it does is it opens up utility patent protection for plant varieties that are just the result of traditional breeding. So for our tech transfer people, that is an important option that is out there to protect the work of all of their researchers.
Absolutely, versus a plant patent, which is a very narrow scope of protection.
Very narrow.
Very narrow. And for PVPs, you have the whole, is it essentially derived or not, which courts are still trying to figure out exactly what that means. That's a whole other topic for an hour podcast in and of itself.
Yes.
Well, we're on the topic of PVPs. They're administered, as you mentioned, through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and many universities use PVPs. And you, in fact, as I mentioned in the intro, are on the USDA PVP Advisory Board. And there were some pretty big changes that came into effect in 2018 as part of the Farm Bill. And that actually expanded PVP protection for asexually propagated plants. So can you explain what that change means in practice and how the regulatory landscape has evolved since that point?
Sure. And I'm no longer on the PVP advisory board. I served 3 terms, and that's enough for anyone.
Enough for you.
So I'm not currently on it, but I was on it in 2018 when the Farm Bill passed. And what that did is it expanded PVP protection to asexually produced plants, as you mentioned. And it also expanded protection to hemp and cannabis, which was also a very, very big change. By expanding to asexually produced plants, the thinking was that it was a broader form of protection for asexually produced plants than the plant patent statute, because our PVPs allow expansion of protection to essentially derived varieties. As you said, as soon as somebody knows what an essentially derived variety is, that'll be the first person who knows what an essentially derived variety is. We have a few cases from the Netherlands on the topic, and UPOV recently issued some explanatory notes about what we consider essentially derived. But you could typically think about it, at the very least, certainly a transgene conversion of a germplasm would be essentially derived at the very least, and then going further than that, we just don't know. So the 2018 Farm Bill was an attempt to sort of broaden the protections available for asexually produced plants. And it's working pretty well. We've got there's been a lot of PVPs issued for cannabis, for hemp, and for some other plants as well. So it's just chugging along, and it is a new option that everyone should consider if they have an asexually produced plant.
Absolutely. And you mentioned UPOV and some cases coming out of the Netherlands, and I think that's a great segue to my next question is, we've been focusing mainly on the U.S., but as we both know, universities develop plant varieties with commercial potential for international markets as well. So what does the global protection landscape look like for plants? How do international conventions like the UPOV system that you mentioned interact with U.S. protections, and what do you think TTOs should know about protecting plant IP abroad?
Well, so with utility patents, the United States are available for plant varieties. Canada offers protection. You have to claim it as a cell. Canada, Australia, Japan, the United States, and Lebanon also offer utility patent protection for plant varieties. And I know that because I was giving a speech one time, and somebody in the audience, when I made that comment, waved their hand and said, "What about Lebanon?" And I did not know that, but I researched it after the fact, and I'll be darned. They just passed legislation a few years ago that they will grant utility patents for plant varieties. Everywhere else in the world, we have plant breeders' rights as an option, and that's all that's available. So when you're thinking internationally, we're talking about plant breeders' rights. There are a couple of things that are important to consider timing-wise. For plant breeders' rights, you have 1 year from your first sale in country and 4 years from your first sale anywhere. So that timing is really important, and it's important that you log in that first sale date because you have a drop dead date coming in 4 years. And I have a client right now that just had to file, okay, it's, your bar date, we're done. Where else? It's the last call. Where do you want to file? And we get those applications on file. The other thing that is really unique and that everyone should keep in mind about plant breeders' rights is UPOV issues a proposed statutory guidelines for plant breeders' rights. Their main one that most countries have is 1978, and then they revised it in 1991 to be a little bit broader. Every country from those suggested statutes passes their own statute. So what happens is every country has little different permutations. And the reason I think that they have a lot of these permutations is this is a very controversial topic for many countries. One of the stories that I always tell is I was honored to be a part of the U.S. designation from the USPTO to go to Ghana, Africa, to participate in a conference where we were trying to get people to encourage their countries to sign on to something, the Arusha Protocol, which would be a one-stop shop for plant breeders' rights, sort of like the EPO patents. So we were encouraging people to do that, and we were talking to the, I think it was the prime minister of one of the countries, and she had a 20-year battle to try to get, and I think it was Ghana, to sign on to the Arusha Protocol. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the people that were arguing saw this as an attempt by the large seed companies to come in and introduce GMO varieties to the country. They even went so far as to say that they were going to introduce these GMO varieties that would have frog genes in them, and when people consumed them, they would become like frogs. This was an argument that was made in the Supreme Court of Ghana. So it's really controversial, and so countries somewhat do what they can to get the legislation passed. So there are different permutations in every country. It is absolutely essential that you find counsel that has a very carefully cultivated list of foreign associates that really know what they're doing. Because anybody that files a patent will tell you they can do a PVP. Now, whether or not they actually have done plant breeders' rights or PVPs is a big difference. So organizations like CIOPORA or ASTA, really do your research or make sure that your counsel knows. I have a very carefully cultivated list of foreign associates, and I'm ruthless if things don't go well. It's really important to know that your counsel has these connections.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is a very small kind of niche field to practice in. So finding good local counsel really is essential.
Yes.
And I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about CRISPR and other gene editing technologies, because they're really not only transforming the medicines and diagnostic field, but it's transforming plant science as well. So from a patent perspective, how do you think gene editing is changing the IP strategy for universities that have maybe developed a new plant using CRISPR compared to ones that have been developed through conventional breeding techniques?
Yeah. So obviously the regulatory pathway is significantly different.
Yeah.
So we need to, it's loosening up, but it's a big difference. And also, I think that what I see a lot, and I get really frustrated with when I see my colleagues that will prosecute patent applications to something with gene edited or with CRISPR. What is the ultimate product? The ultimate product at the end of the day is basically the same as something that was developed through traditional breeding, right? It's the farmer. It's the farmer. Is it an input trait that's going to help the farmer increase their yields? Is it an output trait that is going to make the oil, like soybean oil, more healthy, higher lactic acid content or something like that? So where's the value proposition of the edit that was made? And I see so many patent applications that don't claim the ultimate variety, the product that's going to be out on the market. They claim this really cool thing, and it is cool. You may have gotten a gene to express, and it's got this trait. Is that trait valuable as an output, or is it valuable as an input? And how are we going to make sure that we have a claim to the trait, to the actual variety that incorporates the trait? And too many people just do it at a molecular level, and they'll claim, a transformed gene or something that's in this plant. Well, that's great, but what's the product? The product is going to be a seed or a plant or a tomato or a potato. It's absolutely imperative to have those claims in your application.
Yeah, that's a good strategy too. And I can see where that could very well get lost. And, if we're talking about CRISPR technology and gene editing, that whole patent landscape is extremely complex. And we could spend an hour talking about Broad and University of California, Toolgen, and others. But just at a kind of high level for university TTOs whose researchers are using CRISPR as a tool to develop new plant varieties, what do you think they need to know about the foundational CRISPR patent landscape as well as licensing obligations?
Yep. So I would direct everyone to Corteva. Pioneer Corteva has done an amazing thing. They created a patent pool, and they will license. They got licenses from all sides of the dispute, from Broad and from MIT, and are making that available to researchers if it's for a university or a nonprofit, for almost nothing. And you can be confident then that you have satisfied your obligation. And then when it becomes time for commercial, you can go back to them and they will negotiate. And I've had a number of clients that have gone through that system and that process, and it's really incredible. Now, no option like that exists outside of the plant world. And the human side, maybe it's I think us plant people are friendlier, kinder, maybe.
maybe that's what it is, yeah.
But, there's something about trying to feed the world and trying to make crops that are available for food insecure countries. I think there's that aspect of it, but it's really wonderful. I just checked before we spoke today, and the website is still live and running. And I know a couple of people who are doing the negotiations. So absolutely keep your I's dotted and your T's crossed. Make sure you've got that done. Just get that out of the way. And then your researcher is free to do what they want to do.
Now, another really hot area, as you well know, is AI, and that's being used increasingly in all kinds of research, and plant breeding is no exception. It's being used for everything from trait identification, genomic selection, and even predictive modeling. So how are questions about AI-assisted inventions and inventorship playing out in the plant space, and what do you think TTOs should be thinking about?
So I think there are a couple of things that TTO should really be thinking about with AI. And the first one, apart from inventorship, that I really think it's important for everyone to know is ChatGPT and the possibility of public disclosure when you're using some of these AI resources. Even BLAST is now being considered by many. I conservatively consider anybody who's doing a BLAST search from the NCBI, if you use their public database or if you use ChatGPT, those are potential public disclosures of your invention that you need to think about. I think those we're right in the phase right now where people don't intuitively automatically think of that. So people are getting surprises when we look through an invention disclosure form and you said we blasted this sequence to find homologs. Well, where did you blast it and how? And that could be a public disclosure. So we have to be thinking about these AI tools also, if they're not in a closed system, are really a trap for the unwary. Also, the flip side of that, thinking about inventorship with AI. I was hoping I'd retire before I have to deal too much with AI, but unfortunately, I'm still kicking. Yeah. So here we are. So
it's coming fast and furious, to quote a movie title.
Yeah. And I have a couple of breeders that will they use AI to help identify genes, right? You want to find a trait. So most traits are multigenic. So where are you going to find these potential targets that you might want to mutate? So AI plays a part in that, and it's really about who developed the prompt, right? Who developed the prompt that got this, or if you have a specialized program, who developed the program that was responding to this particular prompt. So it's absolutely something that has to be investigated and disclosed on your disclosure forms. I would make sure that both of your invention disclosure forms have the something that you can fill out that says how was AI used, and I wouldn't even put it that way. I said any public databases or ChatGPT or things like that. I would phrase it more like that because everybody will say AI. Well, of course not, but oh yeah, I use ChatGPT or I use BLAST. Well, that counts. So.
Now, you work with a lot of universities and research institutions, and I'm curious, what are some of the most common licensing challenges that tech transfer offices face when it comes to plant varieties? And have you seen unique issues come up with respect to plants that maybe don't come up with other university technologies?
Well, the big one is we're licensing something that can reproduce, right? So you have to be really careful. You have to make sure that your licenses talk about when they plant the seed. What happens with seed that is not planted, with not harvested? Can they keep some of that seed? Are they allowed to breed with the seed? Can they cross it? Are they allowed to sequence it? Are they allowed to use genetic material into the variety? That all has to be spelled out, and who owns what has to be very clearly delineated. And you've got things like you need to do a seed increase in order to get enough seed to sell. Well, that farmer needs to be bound under contract with what they can do with the seed. And it's multi-levels of development. It's much more complicated than I sell you a widget and you've got the widget and now you use your widget. So it's a lot more complicated in that for production, from a production aspect, from a harvesting aspect, and from what you sell ultimately to the consumer. So there's a lot more layers, a lot more contracts that have to be done, and a lot more things spelled out about ownership and what people can do.
So have you seen particular royalty structures that tend to work best for university-developed plant varieties?
I would say I probably don't have a lot of experience in the actual licensing of it. Typically, if you have a variety that's used as a parent, I think back what I used to see was 5% royalty for every parent that's used in a hybrid, which is a cross of two parents, one genome from each that goes into that, and the hybrid is the result of that. But both parents have to be pure inbred, so that happens for corn. things that have been bred for so long that we do have actual inbreds that are homozygous at every locus. So you might have one parent that forms a parent or a male parent or female parent of multiple different hybrids that are sold because it's a very good female parent or it's a very good pollen parent. So you might have several products that are a result of one. And so how much is that hybrid is that parent? So I see all kinds of different royalty structures. And then you have asexually produced things where it's actually the fruit of the plant is exactly the same every generation. That's going to require a little bit higher royalty, obviously, because it's a one-shot deal kind of. So I've seen those kinds of things, but as far as specifics, probably I don't get into the weeds that much.
Got it. And I want to go back for a second. We talked about the J.E.M. ag case, and let's talk about enforcement, because there are some unique challenges like we alluded to before. So if a university licenses a new variety to a commercial partner and there's unauthorized propagation, how difficult has it been in your experience to detect and enforce plant IP rights? And are there some practical tips you can give TTOs about building enforcement provisions into their agreements?
So I have a couple of clients and university clients as well that we are sort of at the ready. And by that, I mean, we have sequenced their variety and we have that stored with a third party. And so every year we will go out and we will sample offerings that from licensees and make sure that it is actually our variety when it's supposed to be, or it's not our variety when it's not supposed to be. But I think using that third party sequencer and having that sequence and having that seed stored, there are a lot of three party sources. Eurofins is one that will store the seed and keep it there for whenever you might need to enforce, or also tissue culture that you could use to enforce for an asexually produced plant. But that costs money, so that's really only going to be available for your really, really big hits, your big money makers. But it is important to have that because you can't just, as you say, randomly say, well, that's my stuff that they're selling. Well, how do you know that? Well, because we have this sequence that we've already maintained since before the patent that we know. So it's important to have that in place. And I use a private investigator to go and to get the samples. We make sure we have chain of custody documents all in place. It's rather complicated, but it is doable. And so a lot of times what we would get would be tips at seed cleaning facilities. They'll be like, so-and-so was just in here with some of your variety. And I would also plug right now CIPA, who's actually the Seed Innovation Protection Alliance that has actually become really involved with AUTM and our plant special interest group. And they are exclusively designed for protection, and they will do audits for free. They will help you. They have a tip line that people can call in if they think that there's something. So there's a great resource there, and that is exclusively their focus. And they understand that there's a need, particularly for tech transfer offices, to try to help provide these kind of services at a reasonable cost. So I would encourage anybody that's got that concern to look at CIPA and to talk to some of those people there.
Yeah, CIPA sounds like a great resource for tech transfer offices because otherwise, how else are they going to try and enforce? It would, like you said, be challenging, expensive, time-consuming, all those other things. And for universities that have plant breeders that are developing varieties through conventional methods, a lot of them have been breeding at their institutions for long periods of time, and they haven't necessarily always engaged with the tech transfer office. So do you have some tips how TTOs can build relationships with their plant science departments and the best way to educate faculty about the values and options for protecting their work?
That is so important because we are actually at a coming crisis in that there are not enough people going into plant breeding. So plant breeding is sort of becoming a lost art. And it takes so long to get something developed to the point where it is commercial. I spend untold hours of time trying to track down retired breeders because by the time something is commercial. So it is really one aspect that a tech transfer office should keep in mind is keep those lines of communication open, because it might be 10 years after they've retired or left and their material is still there and people are still working with it. And now we've got something that we want to release. We've got to find the original breeder and get signatures, or make sure that before they retire, you get some sort of assignment document in place. That's really critical. Also, just get out to, everybody loves to talk about their children, right? Every plant breeder loves to show you everything that they're doing. And there are field days. I know a lot of universities have field days. Those can also be a trap. So you got to make sure that if you're going to have a field day where you're going to show off all your new stuff, make sure that there's some sort of sign in or some sort of obligation of confidentiality, that the people who are there understand that these are experimental, not complete, and that there is some confidentiality to the whole thing. But anything like that, field days, certainly it's just the same as any other area, just trying to get the word out. And I would say, look at UC Davis and how successful they have been with some of their plant breeding programs. It is really incredible. Hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's a great program. So, that encourages people quite a bit too.
Absolutely. Because you mentioned clementines. I know they've been extremely successful with strawberries and grapes, I believe, as well. Mm-hmm. So, that's a great model. And we've had someone from their TTO who works with plant varieties on the podcast in the past, and they're very friendly. They're very willing to share information. So I would encourage listeners to reach out to them. Speaking of sharing germplasm and sharing information, material transfer agreements are a big part of the plant world as well. Germplasm moves between universities. Breeders are frequently sharing. So let's talk about some of the IP issues that TTOs should be watching for in MTAs involving plant materials. And are there places that you've seen in your experience where TTOs or universities or breeders get tripped up?
Oh, yes.
I'm sure a lot.
Yes. It's a little controversial. The traditional plant breeder, the thinking was always diversity is good, right? So we want to have all kinds of diversity in our plant varieties. So if a particular strain of, virus comes, that the whole crop is not wiped out because it's not completely uniform. So breeders would traditionally trade seeds. And I'm at the beginning of my career 30 years ago, everybody was sharing seeds, and it was thought that was a good thing. And it still is a good thing. Diversity is important. But it also, by the time you get something that is cultivated enough to become a variety, that becomes something that is important to protect. So it's important to know what your breeders are doing. And I think it's okay. I think we have to take the position that small farmers want to be able to breed and should be able to breed, but they can't abscond with, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of research and that has gone into a development of a variety. So I think you just have to be careful to change. And the mindset is changing more and more. It started with corn when I was first out of school, and we were working with Pioneer, and they kind of changed the paradigm a little bit. They realized that germplasm was valuable and it was something that should be kept proprietary. And now I've seen it go into, it was first the industrialized row crops, and then it was wheat, and then now it's getting into vegetables and all of the different crops. People are seeing the value of that these breeders through years and years of cultivation and crossing. And it really is a gift. When you see a plant breeder who can actually look at a phenotype, and now they can be aided by genetics as well, but to see what would be valuable or what this plant needs for the next generation to produce a trait, it's really unique, and it deserves protection the same as any other kind of invention deserves protection.
So, Heidi, I want to go back to litigation for a second. Are there any recent court decisions or legal developments involving plant IP in the U.S. that you think tech transfer professionals should be aware of?
I can't think of any. I know that there's a lot of cases coming out of the federal circuit dealing with enablement these days. And so when you're thinking about a genetically modified plant, you always want to get that gene and coverage to all kinds of plants, right? All cereals, if I have it exemplified in wheat, for example, I might want to try to get a claim to all cereals, where there's really a lot more scrutiny involved in how many have you demonstrated? How many examples do you have of this? And this has really been a lot of case law in the monoclonal antibodies, but it is exactly analogous to plants when you're talking about inserting, like, for example, the BT gene into a plant to have resistance to a herbicide. How many examples of plants? Do you have monocots? Do you have dicots? Do you have cereals? Do you have... So I think there is a lot more pressure now to make sure that you have a lot of examples to completely support your under 112, the breadth of whatever you're going to claim for that. I'd say that's the biggest trend in case law that I'm seeing that has applicability to plants that people need to keep in mind.
And I think patent eligibility under Section 101 is still a very live issue in biotech. Are you seeing any particular concerns around Section 101 specific to plant innovations, maybe around naturally occurring genetic variations or traits found in nature?
Yeah, I do. Yes. And the patent office itself, the examiners have gotten a little bit salty and a little bit under 101 these days. So we find ourselves arguing about 101 quite a bit. It is very common with all of the pressure of regulatory pressure of GMOs. So let's go find something that is in the wilderness, that is a wild form of a particular plant that might have this trait, and then bring it back to our lab and back cross it into some of our varieties. Now that's very common, and I write patent applications like that all the time, but it has to be a commercialized and an industrialized variety that is suitable for commercial production, maybe in an environment that it wasn't originally located in from. So I have a client that we were able to patent something for tomato that increases lycopene content. And it was from a wild grown tomato plant that they found that had this trait in it, and brought it back, and through years of breeding made it into something that is commercially produced and at mass scale and in the tomato producing regions of the United States. That's patent eligible subject matter. The trait existed in nature, but it did not exist in nature in a variety that is capable of commercial production. So we make that argument a lot, and the examiners are pushing back sometimes, but we're always able to get it through with that kind of argument. We are having to substantiate the fact that it is not naturally occurring. Now, if you want to talk about Europe takes the position that any cross between two plants is an essentially biological process and is not patent eligible. I disagree, because these crosses would not have happened but for the work of the plant breeder. So, but it is definitely a big issue, and countries are coming down on opposite sides of that.
Speaking of Europe, I want to stay there for a second and ask you about Europe's Unified Patent Court, because it's been in operation now for several years and has issued some decisions that have been relevant to plant technology. Do you think that's a system TTO should be paying attention to? And how do you think it might change the calculus for universities who want to seek IP protection for their plant technology over in Europe?
I think the Unified Patent Court, it is a great option. It's all or none sort of situation. So it makes me a little nervous. If you've got lots of different markets in Europe that are valuable, it's probably worth it to just go into the individual countries rather than a unified patent. But it is cost effective. And so there's that balance, but hopefully at that point you've got a licensee involved that can help you with some of those cost determinations. If there is a way to cover a particular invention with multiple patents, then I feel a lot better about using a unified patent for maybe one, and then covering it again from a different aspect that maybe I didn't use a unified patent. So we've got all bases covered. That's But the one-shot aspect of it and a whole new development of case law it makes me a little queasy.
Absolutely. Same with the pharma side of things. It makes you very queasy,
Yes,
given how
exactly.
valuable these inventions are. Yeah, definitely. So, Heidi, I want to ask you, looking ahead over the next few years, what are the one or two developments in plant IP that you're watching most closely, whether that's legislative, regulatory, or in the courts, that you think our listeners should keep their eye out for and keep on their radar?
A couple of things. I think that we're going to start seeing a lot more litigation for PVPs. And, I kept telling the USDA, and every time I see anybody from the PVP office, we don't have rules of court for how we're going to enforce a PVP, for example. And I always talk about this. There's two cases in the Netherlands and I think Germany, where the exact same plant breeder's right was enforced against the exact same potential infringer with opposite outcomes, because who has the burden of proof? So if I'm going to assert my plant breeder's right certificate or my PVP here in the US, do I first have to prove that I have a valid PVP before? And then are they presumed to infringe and they have to prove that they are not infringing, or is it the other way around? We don't know, because we absolutely have a complete absence of case law of actually going to trial. And I keep trying to tell the USDA that they need to put forth some sort of, here's your rules of court for trying these kinds of things. They're non-binding, but here's the sample. We have those for torts. We have those for lots of other areas of the law, for trade secrets. What's the burden of proof? And we don't know any of that right now. And I do think that money is getting big enough and clients are getting sophisticated enough in this area that we're going to start seeing some litigation. So it may be slowly and painfully that through this process, these rules of court and these presumptions and all of that will evolve with time. I think that's a big change that we're all going to see. You guys all see, maybe. Hopefully I'll be on a beach somewhere and read about it. So we'll see.
Who knows? It might come faster.
Another big change, I think, is deposits. What can and can't you do with a deposit for an application? Can you sequence it? We have to make a deposit of seed to enable our application, but what does that really mean? And what can competitors do with that? I think that's been ripe for about 20 years, but everything settles before you get to that point. So those are some things that I see on the horizon.
Now, if you had a chance to sit down with every tech transfer director in the country who has a plant breeder on their campus, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them about protecting and commercializing their plant innovations?
Depending on what crop they work with or what kind of plants they work with, it might be as simple as IP is a good and valuable thing. I mean, there are a lot of people, a lot of plant breeders that are still we all share seeds and diversity is good and we don't want any exclusive rights to anything. And to which case I might send them to UPOV has a lot of really, really great stories about like Vietnam, since they passed, and I think there was a study in 2017 from them, the economic impact on their country since they've enacted plant breeders' rights. And plant breeders' rights actually allow you to breed with the material. You just commercialize on the propagating material of that variety, but people can still breed with it, which is, I think, an important caveat that allows it to get passed in a lot of these more controversial countries, because that's a very difficult concept for a traditional IP attorney to get their head around. Well, if you can breed with it, what's the point of protection? Well, the point of protection is that you get that first generation protected. You get that propagating material of that variety protected. And it also shows, I think, demonstrates, for example, for the Arusha Protocol in Africa, it demonstrates a commitment by the court system and the legislative system to, we think that IP in plants is important and we are willing to invest resources to protect it. And it shows because the private investment in countries after they pass these kinds of rights really skyrockets because companies are willing to go there now and to produce seeds that will grow there. So I think it can be the same old thing of IP is not a bad thing. I still have that discussion with plant breeders today. So it might be that basic.
Now, Heidi, as the podcast comes to a close, I wanted to ask you for a TTO professional who wants to get smarter about plant IP. Maybe they're new to it or they're handling their first plant disclosure. Where should they go to learn more? Are there resources, organizations, or training opportunities that you could recommend?
This is our commercial for Autumn, right?
Exactly.
It's been so much fun to watch Autumn embrace plants and IP with plants so much more. At the annual meeting, I think there were
a lot of sessions.
5.
Yeah.
There were tons of sessions on plant IP. And we have seasoned professionals. If I can name names, Tom Herlash and Janie Hurley from Texas, and at Riverside, Michael's retired, but Brian Sue. There's so many people, and there's a great community of tech transfer professionals that will all help each other out. The Plant Special Interest Group, we meet every meeting. And we just talk about issues that people are seeing and that are going on. And Ann Hall, also University of Minnesota, so many people that have been doing this for 20 plus years because we're all kind of unicorns out there. But you just got to find us, and there is a lot of help. And SIPA is a great organization to help if you've got an enforcement concern as well.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much. This has been a really insightful conversation. Thank you so much for your time and spending some time talking about plant varieties with us.
Wonderful. It's been a great opportunity, Lisa. Thank you.
Heidi, this has been an incredibly rich and practical conversation. You've given us a clear roadmap for navigating the complex world of plant IP, from understanding the different forms of protection available to the implications of CRISPR and gene editing, to the licensing and enforcement challenges that are unique to plants, and the legal developments every tech transfer professional should be tracking. For our listeners, we'll include links in the show notes to resources Heidi mentioned, including information on PVP filing, CIOPORA, Autumn's plant-related program, and Heidi's firm. If you have plant breeders on your campus and you haven't had a conversation with them about IP strategy lately, consider this episode your call to action. This has been Autumn on the Air. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at AUTM.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.